So I'm finishing out Genesis. I've already read it, and I'm just giving the full review. So we're going to go back down here into the book, and it's 26, Isaac and Abimelech. So we're going to start up here, and the key events is Jacob steals the blessing from here. But before we get to that, it's Jacob conspires to steal the blessing and pretending. And Jeff Cavins points out that a blessing carries the power to accomplish what it declares. So, this is, it kind of goes into the repeat of Abraham and Abimelech. And that makes me curious because it's those parallels and families repeat. It goes into Isaac and Abimelech. So that to me was very interesting. It's like he's carrying out this covenant made with Abraham, now with Isaac. So that's very interesting. So then once again, there's a well involved, and he built an altar to the Lord. So they called that well Sheba, and the name of that city was Beersheba. So I want to look into that. And then Esau marries Esau's wife Mary, and that makes them all better. So okay. We all know the story of Abraham was going blind, and Jacob fooled him after conspiring with his mother to steal the blessing. Esau discovers this blessing is lost, and he and Abraham are upset with each other and angry with each other. Another tragic loser brother who becomes a little bitter, I think. So Jacob had to... see. So that's where they're angry here. And Jacob has to escape his brother's fury because he stole this blessing. Esau heard Isaac telling him where to go to find the wife that he needs to marry, not a Canaanite for whatever reason. Meanwhile, Esau is angry at dad, and he marries just that, a Canaanite woman that his father told his brother Jacob not to marry. And so Esau knows Jacob is obedient, but he does the opposite. And I find this sad. It's sort of self-punishing. And then we move to 28, Genesis 28. And Jacob has a dream at Bethel where God tells him what's going on in his plan and tells him what he needs to do. And that is to stay there, to stay away from his brother for a little while. And then it jumps into 29, Jacob meets Rachel. And there's again family relations, and I find that weird. It weirds me out. So the next part, I believe, is where I believe you might get away with something, but you're always going to have consequences of some sort. And that's kind of what happens with Jacob. We know the story. Jacob stealing his brother's blessing comes back on him. He's tricked into marrying Leah, and then he's cheated in wages further down into Genesis 31, I think it is. And again, it comes from disobedience, as Jeff Cavin points out. A person might not think that, putting that together, just reading it dry. And then when the Lord sees Leah was hated, and that word is right in there, that Leah was hated. I think it's right there. And so he opens Leah's womb, it says, and she gives them 4 children, and then she gives him her maid when she stops having children. Then she gives him her maid. And then Rachel, out of sadness and envy over her sister, gives him her maid for him to have children. So there's all these children coming through all these women, and that's just like wow to me. Um, so, um, so Jacob prospers. And then let's see. Geez. So we move on to the next key event is Jacob wrestling with God, and his name is changed to Israel, which means wrestle with God. And Esau, Jacob goes through all that. He has all those women, all those children. And then he comes back, and Esau forgives him. And they're generous with each other, and that's really nice. And I don't go into that too much because most of us know those stories. And then there's a daughter of Jacob and Leah, Dinah. And she's treated bad as a harlot, and the brothers kill those who treated her as a harlot. So that was an interesting story to read. Rachel gives birth to Benjamin. And soon after, Isaac dies too. So, I don't have these, I didn't put those pages in for that one. So, Dinah's avenged by her brothers. The death of Jacob, the birth of Benjamin, and the death of Rachel. So that was sad. Just like when I do my family tree, it's very sad to see these births and deaths. So the twins, Jacob and Esau, who are back together again, bury their father. So once again, it comes up to all these unusual names that are born to his brother Esau. For some reason, they put all these names in there. I don't understand why. Maybe it comes up later. I don't know. But why they have all these characters in here, I don't know. But the key event in the next is Genesis 37 is Joseph is sold into slavery. And that comes over here. So when those wives, including all those maidservants, which I find weird, Jacob has 12 sons. And of course, Joseph is his favorite. Joseph, the brothers are very jealous when Joseph talks about a dream that he had. And even Jacob kind of scoffs at it. And I like Joseph, not just because I have a son named Joseph, but because he can also interpret dreams. And soon after it says that. So the next key event is that Joseph sold into slavery, but the jealous brothers. But it starts out by saying Joseph is 17 years old. And I don't know why, but I like hearing those kind of things of how old they are. It kind of orients me in the story. And it kind of makes it more relatable. I think of him as a teenager. And I also notice everyone talks about Joseph's coat of colors. It says he has a coat, but it just really says it's a coat with long sleeves that his father made for him. So I thought that was interesting. It's not really even a coat of colors. I don't know where that came from. And then his one brother, as they're selling him into slavery, his brother's being mean because they're jealous of him. His one brother, Reuben, tries to save him. And then another brother, Judah, tried to save him, at least from being killed. He said, well, let's sell him. And so they go and get and kill a poor goat. I hate the way these animals are sacrificed. And they dip their brother's coat with the long sleeves that the father made for him, that they're all jealous of, into blood, and say it was the blood of their brother. And Jeff Caven skips over a lot of this, just because it's childhood and marriage, with this person and that person, and had children with her, a lot of little logistical stuff. I don't know if these characters come up again in these supplemental books, but we will find out. But I did read it all to be sure I wasn't missing anything. And then we moved to Judah and Tamar. So I found this interesting that he says Judah gets married to his firstborn who was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slothed him. He killed him. And then Judah said to his second son, Onan, go into your, now I should have said Judah is the brother of of Joseph, Jacob's other child. So Judah tells his second son, Onan, to go to his brother's wife and to perform a duty of a brother, take his wife and have and raise up children for your brother. And we all know that's not in our culture, but we've heard these stories called the duty of a brother-in-law. Yeah, we don't do something like that. And the brother refused, and then the Lord killed him too. So you better do as you're told by your parents, is what I took from that. But then it gets icky, where Judah tells Tamar, his son's widow, to stay with them until the other son grows up for her. But then one day she dresses herself up and covers her face, and okay, so he thinks she's a harlot and offers her something for sex, I think a goat or something, and she gets pregnant. I can't really tell if it's his child, but she does say it. Not that I just find it weird he doesn't know her while he's having sex with her. That to me is weird. So I don't know if these are excuses in this Bible or what, but the way it's put, which I find weird, and I don't know why all these weird stories are in here. I don't know if it comes up later or what it's supposed to teach us, but it's something to reflect on at some point, now that knowing the story to some degree. I just find it odd that he finds out she's been a harlot. He orders her burned. And then she says, I'm carrying a child and it's yours, kind of like that. And he realizes that he was wrong. So again, it's just strange. And it comes time for delivery. And once again, it's twins. And it talks about the scarlet thread, which I find interesting, because that scarlet letter, the scarlet thread, I wonder, so I'd like to look into that a little further. So I'm not sure. This is one of my reflections. It kind of seems like an insignificant story, but maybe I'm wrong, so we'll see later. And then Genesis 39 up here. Okay, back to Joseph ending up imprisoned and has prophetic dreams. But before that, and why I have an interest in him, is I've had prophetic dreams that just have blown me away when they happen. Now, I'm going to tell a little personal story here, is that I had my son and his wife, he was in the Navy, and he came down with his wife, and they walked into the house, and later on they left and went to her mom's to visit, and because they were in Jacksonville. So I lay down to go to sleep, and all of a sudden I sat up and gasped like I was coming up out of water. I just remember that like that. And I said, oh my God, Kate will be pregnant December, January. And my husband at the time said, well, how many months is a pregnancy? And I said 9. And he said, they're usually going to include a December and January. I said, no, this December, January. And I was between sleep and wake when it happened. I wasn't quite asleep when God seems to try to talk to us. So 8 months later, that was the weekend she conceived. I counted back exactly. 8 months later, her water broke prematurely, and she was in the hospital from December 15th to January 15th with broken water bag. And my grandson was between worlds. So that, and I've had other prophetic dreams about I'll tell you later about those. So anyway, so back to 39. Let me switch you back here to 39. So Joseph ends up in prison, and Joseph's master's wife likes him, and it tells us here that Joseph is a very handsome man, and he would not touch her in the way she wanted, so she falsely accused him, and he runs away. His clothes get torn and ripped, and she said that that's because he tried to attack her. So he was sent to prison. His master sent him to prison, and it says that God remained with him, and I thought, yes, God remains with us when we're at our darkest hours. So then we get to Genesis 40, and then the chief baker and the chief butler get in trouble with the master Pharaoh. And so they're in prison with Joseph, and Joseph begins interpreting their dreams in prison. And he tells the chief butler that he'll be restored to his position. And after he hears his dream, and the chief baker, he tells him that, he's going to die. Something like he's going to be hung or something like that. Because this guy's dreams tell him that's going to happen. Just like my dreams told me. So those are exactly what happened, and the chief butler didn't remember until later. So this is what got me to thinking about my dreams, and I had another dream, and I'll tell you real quick about. I had a daughter, and meanwhile, I had two blonde-haired boys, and this dream is I had a curly-haired dark daughter. She had curly hair in the dream, and it was years later. I had a little curly-haired daughter with very black hair, where my boys had blonde hair like me. So I dreamed that years before, and just like in Joseph's dreams, there were symbols, and I had a symbol of a telephone cord, and it was far away from, in the dream, and I did have her when I moved to the state of Florida from the state of Pennsylvania, so that explained the telephone cord in my dream. But the only reason I remembered is my mother told me to draw the dream. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even remembered. So it makes me wonder if some of us have dreams that we don't remember or don't know, maybe that are prophetic, and even talks here. Okay, so now back to the story. So he talks and hears about the chief butler, but he doesn't remember the dreams that Joseph interpreted for him until the Pharaoh had a dream, and he told him about Joseph interpreting dreams, because the Pharaoh had been looking all over for someone to interpret it, and no one could. And then Joseph interprets the dreams. He brings him up there. He gets him to interpret, and he's so impressed because everything comes true. And he ends up elevating him to the top position. So now here's Joseph being sold into slavery and being elevated through his dreams. And how else does God speak to us but in our dreams? So I wonder if God was telling me about the dark-haired little girl, like him him interpreting those dreams. And Joseph, I thought, isn't it always the way when someone's trying to hold you back and hurt you from jealousy, God somehow steps in and elevates you, if it's part of his plan, and remembers you in your darkest hours. Later, Joseph does say it was God who elevated him, though. So he tells Pharaoh that it's not from him, it's from God, and God was revealing to him that he was about to do 7 years of famine because of the dreams and the symbol. There were 7 cows and 7 this and 7 that. And so he told him to put away food, so much grain, whatever, because there was a famine coming according to Pharaoh's dream. So he elevates Joseph to rise to power of governor. And through that power, he goes about collecting food and putting away for the Pharaoh. And a famine comes, and luckily, because of Joseph, Pharaoh has the food, because of Joseph interpreting his dreams correctly. So he has lots of people to feed, and who comes along but Joseph's brothers? He knows they're his brothers, but he tests them, and he says, aren't you feeling guilty about... He doesn't say, aren't you feeling guilty, but it sort of implies that about another brother, and somehow he gets it out of them by putting them in prison themselves. And the brother who tried to save him, Reuben, says, I did tell you not to sin against your brother, but you wouldn't listen. So he knows that now. So this made Joseph emotional, and he even cried and turned his head. But then he ordered they be given food and provisions for their journey. He still didn't reveal that they were his brothers. All the while, they didn't know this. So by 45, Joseph extends forgiveness and preserves the life of his family despite their jealousy. And that was very touching, all of that part of the story. And the key event here is Jacob moves his family to Egypt because Joseph said he could provide for 5 more years of famine. And would he Pharaoh allowed them to move there, where Joseph, through the Pharaoh, would provide the entire family. And God, and they said they were sorry, and he said, God placed me here. You didn't sell me to Egypt, that kind of thing. So that made me think a lot of things like when we see something terrible happen and we blame someone because maybe for our good. My mother used to have the saying, good luck, bad luck, all the same. And that's kind of what it reminds me of. And it reminds me of how the devil may mean something for our demise and God turns it to good. And that's what happened to me in so many times in my life, and I'm sure to you. So then the brothers go back and tell their father that his favorite son is actually alive. He can't believe it. He sees everything Joseph sent them home with, and he has visions that night, and God tells him, I am the God of your father. Go to Egypt, and they will make you a great nation in Joseph's hand, and he'll close your eyes. And that was very touching to me, because I thought about my mother on her deathbed, and he's telling him he will be there on your deathbed. And once again, it goes into all the names of the children they have, and all this 14 of the one we can't keep track of. And I think this is part of the reason why the Bible's so hard to read. Yeah, I think this is why it's hard to read. And so then when Joseph's father, who was once Joseph's father, who was once Jacob and now Israel, finally gets to meet Joseph's children, 2 boys. It's sort of a repeat in how they had stolen his brother's blessing. But there's no stealing in this case. It's just they like the second child better. Joseph said he wanted him to bless the firstborn, and Israel, and Jacob said no, or rather, Joseph said no. Jacob wanted to bless the firstborn. He said, no, no, Jacob says, I'm sorry. I'm trying to hurry. Joseph wants him to do the firstborn, and Jacob says, no, your second son, who will be the greatest of these. And so that was interesting, a repeat. We know often that there are repeats in families. And then Jacob Israel is on his deathbed, and he calls all of this, 12 sons, and he goes through the list and he charges them. And he tells them what he goes through the list, tells them what he's charging, and each one of them, you hear kind of what each son is a little like. And it's interesting language, and it makes me think of when a person is on their deathbed and they tell you something. Sometimes it's the most honest thing they will tell you. And I remember the last days of Jacob there. Jacob blesses the son. And then it reminds me a little bit, of my own mother, what she told me on her deathbed, that I needed to do better with forgiveness, which she was correct about. And I'm still working on that, but I did understand and get the lesson. No, sweetie, don't eat those. And she was right. So ever since then, I've been working on that personally. So that related to me personally. And then he goes into a little bit about their burial process once, he's died, and the embalming and the 40 days. So that was interesting, and the number of days that they kept them. But they wept for him for the 40 days. And I don't know why I find those numbers interesting, but I do. And that's the very end of Genesis. We're all brothers. It makes it, we feel the full weight of, they feel the full weight of their sin. Oh, darn it. Hold on. They feel the full weight of their sin, these brothers, and their guilt. And they say that their father wants him to forgive their sin. And they want, Joseph to forgive their sin. That's what their father wants. And they were begging him for that and telling them they were sorry and bowing down, just like in his dream that he prophesied about. And he said, okay, that's okay, because God meant it for good, to keep you all alive. So do not fear. And that was repeated because that sort of said prior. So I thought that was interesting. It ends on a note of forgiveness. So when we I just want to add, when we pray, we talk to God, but when we read scripture, God talks to us. And God is always behind all of these scenes, guiding everything, especially in this particular plan. Despite our free will, he works within and around that. And that's what's so fascinating, how Jeff Caven shows, and the explanation before each, and the timeline, and how he's doing it. So, I love that it ended on forgiveness, because I think it's a big lesson a lot of us have to learn. So thank you for listening. That's the end of the patriarch period, the end of the second period of the 12 periods, but still only the end of one of the 14 books. I hope that's understandable. Thank you.